Forgiveness, it's one of the most powerful, complicated, and misunderstood human abilities. We talk about it often. We tell others to just forgive and move on. But when it comes to our own pain, it's never that simple. Forgiveness feels heavy. It can feel like surrender, like letting someone off the hook, or pretending that what happened didn't hurt. But in truth, forgiveness is not about weakness. It's about strength. It's about freeing ourselves and opening the door to deeper connection, not just with others, but with life itself. When you think about human relationships, friendships, families, marriages, communities, they're all fragile in one way or another. No matter how much love or trust exists, eventually someone makes a mistake. Someone forgets, disappoints, or hurts. It's part of being human. But what happens next, how we respond to those moments, determines whether the bond weakens or grows stronger. And that's where forgiveness enters the picture. Because forgiveness is what allows relationships to heal instead of shatter. It's what turns pain into wisdom, conflict into closeness, and mistakes into opportunities for growth. Think about it. Every deep relationship you've ever had, every bond that truly mattered, has probably required forgiveness at some point. Maybe it was a friend who let you down, a parent who didn't understand you, a partner who said something cruel in anger. Without forgiveness, those wounds can harden into distance. The warmth that once felt easy begins to fade. But when forgiveness takes root, something shifts. The relationship deepens. You see the other person not as perfect, but as human, flawed, yes, but still worthy of love. And in that space, trust grows again. But why is forgiveness so difficult? If it brings healing, why do we resist it so much? Maybe it's because forgiveness asks us to confront pain honestly. It asks us to face betrayal, disappointment, or loss, and to let go of the emotional armor we've built to protect ourselves. That's hard, because anger feels powerful, blame feels safe, resentment gives us a sense of control. Letting go of those emotions can feel like losing something. Yet, in reality, we lose far more by holding on. Resentment is like carrying fire in your hands. It burns you long before it reaches anyone else. There's an old saying that says, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And that's the truth of it. When we cling to bitterness, we don't punish others. We punish ourselves. We stay stuck in the past, replaying moments that can't be changed. The mind loops through what ifs and should haves, and the heart stays closed. But forgiveness opens the door again. It doesn't erase the past, but it changes our relationship to it. It allows us to breathe again. Science even supports this. Studies show that people who practice forgiveness have lower blood pressure, better immune function, and reduced symptoms of anxiety and depression. Forgiveness literally calms the nervous system. It tells the body, you're safe now, you can rest. Because so much of our emotional pain lives in the body. The tension in our shoulders, the tightness in our chest, the unease in our stomach. When we forgive, those knots begin to loosen. Our bodies release what our hearts have been carrying. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It's not about pretending the pain didn't happen or excusing bad behavior. It's about choosing to stop letting that pain define us. It's about saying, what you did hurt me, but I refuse to let it own me. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation either, not always. Sometimes the person who hurt you can't or won't change. In those cases, forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for them. It's not about allowing someone back into your life. It's about allowing yourself to move forward without hate. Still, when forgiveness happens within a relationship, when both people are willing to face the truth and grow from it, it can transform everything. Because in those moments, love becomes real. Not just romantic love, but the kind of love that sees imperfection and chooses compassion anyway. The kind that says, you hurt me, but I still see your humanity. That kind of forgiveness builds a deeper, stronger bond than any relationship that's never been tested. Let's think for a moment about why we hurt each other at all. Most of the time, it's not out of malice. It's out of fear, insecurity, misunderstanding, or pain that hasn't been healed. When we realize that, forgiveness becomes easier, not because the action was okay, but because we see the person behind it. We recognize that everyone carries wounds, and sometimes those wounds cause them to wound others. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains it. And understanding is the first step toward compassion. Forgiveness also connects deeply to empathy. When we can step into someone else's perspective, when we can imagine what they were feeling, fearing, or struggling with, it softens the heart. It doesn't erase accountability, but it creates context. It allows dialogue instead of silence. It invites healing instead of hostility. Because at the core of forgiveness is one simple truth: we are all imperfect. We are all capable of hurting and being hurt. And if we want to be loved in our flaws, we must learn to love others in theirs. Think about the moments when you've needed forgiveness. Maybe you said something harsh in anger. Maybe you disappointed someone you cared about. Maybe you made a choice you regret. Remember how it felt to be forgiven, to have someone say, "It's okay, I know your heart." That moment probably stayed with you. It probably softened you. That's the gift of forgiveness. It not only heals the receiver, but it elevates the giver. It reminds both people that love is stronger than pain. In relationships, forgiveness is the bridge between breakdown and breakthrough. When partners fight, when friends drift apart, when family members clash, those moments can feel like endings. But forgiveness turns them into turning points. It creates space for new understanding, for deeper honesty, for growth. Sometimes conflict even strengthens a bond more than peace ever could. Because through forgiveness, people discover what they're really made of. They learn that love isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. But forgiveness also takes time. You can't force it. You can't rush it. It unfolds like healing from a deep wound. It stings at first, then scabs over, then eventually leaves a scar that tells a story. The scar doesn't mean you've forgotten, it means you've survived. You've learned. You've chosen peace over pain, and that choice, made again and again, becomes a quiet kind of power. In American culture, where independence and pride often take center stage, forgiveness can be especially hard. People are taught to stand their ground, to not let anyone disrespect them. And of course, self-respect matters deeply. But sometimes pride disguises pain. Sometimes "I don't need them" really means "I'm afraid to be hurt again." Forgiveness challenges that mindset. It asks us to be vulnerable again, to risk softness in a world that values strength. But the truth is, vulnerability is the greatest strength of all. It takes courage to say, "You hurt me, but I choose peace." It takes even more courage to mean it. There's also the cultural idea that forgiveness equals weakness, but history shows the opposite. Some of the strongest people the world has ever known, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, built entire movements on forgiveness. They forgave their oppressors, not because the injustice was small, but because they refused to let hatred define their souls. Mandela once said, "When I walked out of prison, I knew that if I didn't leave my bitterness behind, I'd still be in prison." That is the heart of forgiveness. It is freedom. When forgiveness happens on a smaller scale, between two people, it carries that same energy of liberation. It dissolves invisible walls. It makes space for intimacy to return. When you forgive someone, you're saying, "I want something bigger than my pain. I want connection more than I want to be right." And that's where real relationships thrive, not in being perfect, but in being human together. It's also important to remember that forgiveness doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it's quiet and private. Sometimes it's expressed through tears and conversation. Other times it's simply a release, a decision made in your own heart, even if the other person never hears it. What matters is the release, because forgiveness isn't always about words, it's about energy. It's about setting yourself free from what's been holding you back. There's also self-forgiveness, which might be the hardest kind of all. Many people walk around carrying guilt for years, for mistakes, regrets, missed chances. They replay their failures like old films. They punish themselves long after others have stopped. But you can't build deep bonds with others if you can't forgive yourself. Because self-condemnation creates walls around the heart. It keeps you distant, defensive, ashamed. When you learn to forgive yourself, to say, "I was doing my best with what I knew then," you open the door to deeper relationships. You start to let others see you again. You start to let love in. So many relationships suffer, not because of lack of love, but because of unhealed resentment. Words left unsaid, apologies never made, wounds never acknowledged. People stop talking, stop touching, stop trying. They live side by side, but miles apart emotionally. And yet, underneath the silence, there's often still love. It's just buried under layers of pride and pain. Forgiveness is the key that can uncover it again. But how do you forgive someone who isn't sorry? That's one of the hardest questions of all. The answer, though difficult, is this: Forgiveness doesn't require an apology. It's something you do for yourself, because holding on to anger doesn't punish the person who hurt you. It keeps you tied to them. It keeps their actions alive inside your mind. When you forgive without waiting for an apology, you reclaim your power. You say, "You no longer control my peace." That's not weakness, that's strength. Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to trust someone again. Trust is earned. Forgiveness is given. One is a process between two people, the other is an act of liberation for one. You can forgive someone and still choose boundaries. You can wish them peace and still protect your energy. That's not contradiction, it's wisdom. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, it simply releases hatred. Over time, practicing forgiveness can actually change your brain. Neuroscientists have found that forgiving activates regions in the prefrontal cortex associated with empathy and emotional regulation. The more we forgive, the easier it becomes. It's like exercising a muscle. And that makes sense. Humans evolved to survive through cooperation, not constant conflict. Forgiveness restores our natural state of connection. But maybe one of the most beautiful things about forgiveness is that it creates meaning out of pain. It doesn't justify what happened, but it gives it purpose. When you forgive, you turn suffering into understanding. You gain insight into yourself, into others, into the fragility and beauty of being human. You realize that life isn't about avoiding pain, it's about transforming it. There's something incredibly tender about two people who've hurt each other, who've cried and healed and chosen to love again. That kind of relationship has depth. It has roots, because love that's never been tested may be sweet, but love that's been broken and rebuilt is sacred. Forgiveness is what makes that possible. It's what turns us into something unshakable. And beyond personal relationships, forgiveness has the power to heal entire communities. It can mend divisions between generations, between cultures, between nations. It reminds us that we share more than our differences. It reminds us that our humanity, our ability to feel, to fall, to forgive, is what unites us. In a world full of conflict, forgiveness is radical. It's revolutionary. It's what keeps us from losing faith in one another. But like all deep things, forgiveness begins small. One conversation, one apology, one moment of humility, one deep breath before responding in anger. Those small choices, made again and again, create a pattern of compassion. They turn ordinary relationships into extraordinary ones, because when people know that forgiveness is possible, they stop hiding, they start showing up fully, they stop performing perfection and start being real. And that's when intimacy begins. So maybe forgiveness is not just a moral idea, it's a love language. A language that says, "You matter more than this mistake. Our connection matters more than my pride." It's a language that brings peace to the restless and hope to the brokenhearted. It's a language the world desperately needs to remember. So tonight, or maybe tomorrow, think about the people in your life. Who do you still carry pain for? Who do you need to forgive? Not for their sake, but for your own. And who might be waiting for your forgiveness to come home? What would happen if you put down the burden of resentment, even just a little? What might open up in your heart? And don't forget yourself in that question. What parts of your own story do you still hold against yourself? What mistakes do you keep replaying in your mind? What would it feel like to finally say, "I forgive me"? To release yourself from the weight of the past and step forward with gentleness and grace. Because that's what forgiveness really is. Grace. Grace for others, grace for ourselves, grace for the messy, imperfect, beautiful process of being human. It's not about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming the future. It's about making space for love again, for trust again, for peace again. So ask yourself this. What would your life look like if you made forgiveness a daily practice? What would your relationships feel like if you let go of old resentments and chose understanding instead? What kind of world could we build if forgiveness became our first response, not our last resort? Maybe, just maybe, the deeper bonds we all crave, the ones that make life rich and meaningful, begin not with perfection, but with forgiveness. Maybe it's forgiveness that teaches us how to love, fully, honestly, and forever.